Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council webinar. My name is Evan Cameron, and I'm the Manager of Public Affairs and Communications here at the CNIC. Thanks so much for joining us this morning for this really exciting webinar, I think a very engaging topic. As you're very likely aware, global isotope demand is rapidly increasing. In addition to the growing medical applications for isotopes, they also support industries spanning agriculture, security, and infrastructure development. 60% of Canada's GDP is comprised of industries that rely on isotopes in some capacity. In response to this rapid market growth, innovators around the world are developing new technologies to transform how isotopes are produced. We're glad to welcome some of those innovators here today for our exciting panel discussion. Before I introduce you to our panelists, a very brief housekeeping note. We've left some time at the end of our session today for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature, which should be on the top of your screen there, to submit your questions to our team, and we will get to as many as we can during the discussion. With that, let me introduce you to some of our distinguished panelists here today. Dr. Tom Wallace-Smith is co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at Astral Systems, where he leads the development of advanced fusion and neutron technologies. Prior to working at Astral, Tom worked in nuclear reactor design at Rolls-Royce Submarines and completed a PhD at the University of Bristol, including research at Kyoto University's Research Reactor Institute in Japan. Recognized for his contributions to science and technology, he was named in the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in science and healthcare. Jason Parisi is the principal scientist at Marathon Fusion, where he develops the science and technology needed to scale nuclear fusion energy from today's systems to terawatt capacity. A theoretical physicist, his work spans plasma physics, neutronics, fusion, neutron-driven transmutation, and tritium fuel cycle. His core thesis is that fusion neutrons are a transformative resource for medical radioisotope production, enabling new transmutation pathways to produce new and existing radioisotopes for radioligand therapy and imaging. Dr. Michael Daly is a senior nuclear engineer at Transmutex in Geneva. He began his career with Alstom on nuclear power plants before spending 9 years specializing in superconducting magnets. He now brings this combined experience to Transmutex, where as Canada project lead, he leads efforts to explore and develop Transmutex's presence within the Canadian nuclear isotope ecosystem and bring innovative solutions to increasing the production and supply of actinium-225. And last but certainly not least, Cal Doucette has over 35 years of chemical engineering experience, with the last 25 years in the nuclear industry. He has experience in design, operations, and project management, working in various roles at AECL and Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. As Director of Engineering for ARC Clean Technology since 2022, Cal has played a leading role in ARC's partnership with New Brunswick Power to deploy a commercial demonstration of the ARC 100 at the Point Lepreau site. So now that you've met our speakers, let's jump right into the discussion. Tom, I'm going to come to you first. So I've shared your bio, but if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and Astral Systems, and maybe provide a bit of an overview of the isotope production technology that you're developing.
Can you guys hear me okay? Am I coming through?
Yes.
It's very hot in the UK, so I've got lots of fans going in the background to keep me cool today. So yeah, my name is Dr. Tom Smith, co-founder and CTO of Astral. We're a UK-based company, although we actually have quite a few senior people based in Canada. And we like to say that we take a lot of the strengths of the Canadian sort of powerhouse of isotope production and UK's strengths with regards to fusion technologies, combine them together. And we are a manufacturer and operator of compact fusion devices. We have devices that are Tier 9 operating now, generating revenue. And we're essentially looking to basically vertically integrate radioisotope production. So we've done that first part now, where we've got the device operating, we're producing the neutrons. We've done some demonstration isotopes, and in the news just this week came out that we raised our Series A, which is around 40 million Canadian, I think. And that's going to allow us to basically do the second stage, which is get targets and produce isotopes and get basically product to market. And we're aiming to have copper-64 and copper-67 available by the end of next year, and actinium-225 and lead-212 into the back end of 2028. And this is in basically clinically meaningful quantities of doses, essentially. And for both cases, looking to lead in supporting clinical trials, essentially. But yeah, when it comes to the actual device, I recommend going onto the website. It's a sort of desktop sized, sort of 14 centimeters diameter, about 1.5 meters long. The shielding required is much larger than that. You're talking north of 100 tons of shielding, but the system itself is very compact and scalable and modular in the way that you can cluster these systems together, and you benefit from overlapping and increasing neutron flux. So yeah, that's the top level intro, and I haven't been rambling for too long. And thank you
Not at
again
all.
for the invitation. It's a privilege to speak at this great organization.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much, Tom. Jason, I'll come to you next with the exact same question. If you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you're leading at Marathon Fusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks again for the invitation. Just like Tom, it's great to be here. My name is Jason Parisi. I'm a scientist at Marathon Fusion. We're a fusion technology company based in San Francisco, California, and we were founded about 3 years ago now. And our core mission is basically to develop the technologies that enable the scaling of the fusion industry. And we focus on two main ways to do that. The first is enrichment. So the fusion industry requires, for example, large quantities of enriched lithium-6, we think, potentially for fusion energy. Just like also current fission reactors require enriched lithium-7, and future, like next generation fission reactors might require extremely large quantities of enriched lithium-7. So that's one side of our technologies. But the other side is something called blanket technology for fusion reactors. So nuclear fusion reactions have this amazing property where they produce a 14 MeV neutron. And neutrons are extremely interesting when it comes to like transmuting material. But the problem is that currently the number of neutrons that the world produces, or fast neutrons, is very small compared to like the number of protons that we make in cyclotrons, or the number of gammas that we make in, rotatrons or LINACs. And so kind of like Tom and Astral, we're very excited about the future availability of these fusion neutrons that are fast. They don't interact with the Coulomb force. And so it basically means if you can get to high enough flux, you can very efficiently transmute feedstock in a way that maybe you can't do with cyclotrons and other like photon sources. And so basically, our plan is to not actually produce the neutrons ourselves, but work with lots of fusion companies that are starting to produce these neutrons and help produce existing medical radioisotopes for which there is currently constrained supply. But we're also excited about producing novel radioisotopes for which there is zero supply. And so I think I'll leave it there, and happy to talk about more things as they come along. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jason. Same question to you, Michael. A little bit more about yourself and the work that you're leading at Transmutex. Oh, you're on mute, Michael. It's the classic.
Sure.
Microsoft
Yeah, of course. There's always one. So I've been at Transmutex for 2.5 years as a nuclear engineer. I can go back to why I was nuclear. Now I'm looking more at isotopes, but also leading the what we call the Canada project, so really to see how we can start moving and expanding in the Canadian ecosystem. And what we plan to do is effectively try to build a commercial version of the Triumph facility that they currently use for the production of isotopes, with a focus on actinium-225, but potentially many others as well. And there we really want to build a high-powered proton cyclotron using spallation. So we're going to fairly high energies and high intensity. And I think high intensity is really a key differentiator compared to others. But we really want to follow exactly the same spallation process or equivalent processes developed at Triumph. And we want to do it modular as well. So we will have one cyclotron, but we will have a number of target stations. In each of these target stations, we can put a range of various materials, thorium being a prime candidate. And there we will extract a number of isotopes. Again, actinium-225 being one of the one of the leading isotopes as well. So I'll leave it at that for the time being. I'm sure you have other questions a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael. Cal, last but not least, same question to you, a little bit more about yourself and the work, the very exciting work you're leading at ARC.
Hi, my name is Cal Doucette. I'm the Director of Engineering here at ARC Clean Technology Canada. Like Evan said, I spent the last 25 years in the nuclear industry with 20 years at CNL trying to keep the NRU reactor running and helping with Moly production facility. As a side, an interesting story is I was the lead engineer during the NRU vessel leak repair project to return the NRU reactor to service. And several years later, the molybdenum produced in NRU helped diagnose my cancer. So it was a good thing we fixed it. ARC right now is evaluating a medical isotope irradiation facility that would, for the ARC 100 sodium cooled fast reactor. Due to the fast spectrum, the focus for initial production is actinium 225 with radium 223 as a byproduct. Targets would go in and out pneumatically while the reactor stays at full power. So an irradiated target would be handed to an offsite for further processing. A single ARC unit could produce on the order of tens of curies of actinium 225 per year, with the option to add other isotopes such as scandium 47 or copper 67 over time. So the difference is we're designing a 100 megawatt electric reactor that would have a isotope option that could be produced while at power.
Thanks so much, Cal.
That.
Yeah, that's great. We'll definitely dive into a bit more detail later in the discussion. I thought a good place to start. I know some of you touched on this already, but maybe it bears repeating. This is very much a forward-looking webinar discussion we're having today. How these technologies may shape the future of Canada's isotope supply chain. So Michael, I'm going to come to you first with this one. Where is TransMutex today on the path from concept to commercial isotope production?
So for the time being, we're really focusing on the a bit beyond the conceptual design of the cyclotron. We've effectively taken a cyclotron that already exists here in Switzerland at the Pulse-Air Institute. So they go all the way to 72 MeV. We want to push that to 200 MeV. We're using the same technology. We're not going superconducting or anything. We're really just sticking to normal conducting copper, but we are scaling up a machine quite substantially. So that's really where we're focusing on we think that's our core. That's really what we bring to the market is this high power cyclotron based on one that's currently available. That's also has shown very, very high availability, which gives us the confidence that we also can have something that could produce at an industrial and commercial scale without too many stoppages and so forth. And then we're also advancing towards licensing. The facility will be Class 1B. So we start engaging with the CNSC. So that's also another key component of our near-term strategy. At least that's where we're heading for the time being. Then obviously there's always side projects, so trying to improve target material, target stations, trying to ensure that we also reduce the waste that we'll be generating during the production of these isotopes. So there's a lot of optimizations being done there as well.
That's great. Thanks so much, Michael. Tom, I'll come with the same question to you. You kind of touched on it earlier a little bit, but where is Astral today on the path from concept to production?
Yeah, so I can talk about stuff in the UK and in Canada. So we've got a facility in the UK operating at the moment where we do neutron irradiations for different customers, both public and private. And then on top of that, we've done quite a few, I think 9 medically relevant isotopes. We've sort of done some initial demonstrations. And we're looking to do an announcement about that in the coming months where we can go into some more detail. But essentially, we've been validating our models, taking enriched material, different targets, trying them out, optimizing. And particularly at 14 MeV, as Jason sort of alluded to, it's kind of uncharted territory. You know, the nuclear data libraries actually have a fair bit of distinction between them, depending on which ones you choose. So it's been very interesting just to get that data to understand. Okay, as we scale up and increase our bunkers, basically they can handle the systems at full power where we expect to be, and we're quite confident we can start to produce sort of research quantities and get them into sort of preclinical environments very, very shortly. And we've got active projects at the moment with McMaster's. So we have a project called Scale, 67, which is in the production of copper-64 and copper-67. We're working with Promation there, looking at using some automation for the targetry. And essentially, we're looking to basically set up our systems on Canadian soil and start doing some irradiations and start sort of working together with those guys. So that's been a real pleasure. It's really, really nice to work with the guys at McMaster. We've made some really good progress with that. And then beyond that, with actinium and lead, obviously the target material is a little bit harder to get hold of, as I'm sure most people are aware. Radium's what used to be a bit of a taboo material, as everyone remembers the radium on the watches and the people getting poisoned. Whereas now everyone's wishing that they didn't dispose of it a few decades ago. But we've got several ongoing conversations for access to radium, but also purified radium to do some initial tests to basically verify production. And as I'm sure Jason's aware, when you use 14 MeV with radium, you do get actinium, and you can optimize the targetry to get quite good purity with regards to 227 production. But you also get lead-212 at the same time, which is very interesting. So that's something that we're looking to demonstrate as quickly as we can. We have the licenses in the UK to handle it. It's just sort of working with different parties. We have an open memorandum of understanding with IPEN in Brazil. And as part of that, we're negotiating with them around access to some purified radium to do some initial tests, as well as with some other organizations. So yeah, that's kind of where we are at the moment. And particularly with the fundraise announcement, this really allows us to scale up our personnel. And it's worth sort of highlighting that at the moment, the bunker that we have is about 150 tons. And we can only run our reactors up to about 10%, 10 to 20% of full power. So part of the build out right now over the next 6 months is getting into a much larger space where we can ramp things up to full power and do some serious demonstrations. But yeah, that's where we're at the moment. And also, yeah, very open to collaborations and hiring as well. So a team of just shy of 30 people now, and we'll be close to 50 before the end of the year. So
excellent. That's great to hear. Thanks for the thorough overview there, Tom. Cal, I'll come to you with the same question on where ARC is at today on the path from concept to isotope production, recognizing that it's primarily, like you said, power focused with the option for isotopes. So over to you.
So based on OPEX from previous sodium-cooled fast reactors such as FFTF and studies done by the DOE, ARC right now is in the process of conducting a feasibility study on the use of the ARC 100 to produce a gamut of radioisotopes online utilizing the fast neutrons from our commercial demonstration unit in New Brunswick. We've done some of the basic neutronic studies, and we've also taken a look at what equipment we would need to introduce targets and extricate and ship them to a processor. So that's where we are right now in our project.
Great, thank you. And Jason, same question to you. Where is Marathon on the path from concept to production?
Well, so as I alluded to earlier, we have two main areas of focus. The first is enrichment. So we're already producing enriched materials using a technology called the plasma centrifuge. And we think that's interesting both for supporting the fusion industry, but also for producing enriched materials for transmutation. So that's you can come to our office and we'll show you several of these machines that are already up and running. On the transmutation side of things, we've been working with various partners to both do irradiations for new isotope production pathways, as well as developing our own irradiation facilities and targets for irradiation. What's really interesting about neutron irradiation actually is that we don't really have that much experience irradiating feedstock with like 14 MeV neutrons. So there are, for example, people who have looked. So let's look at actinium-225 and lead-212. We're not particularly interested in doing the pathway that Tom talked about, just because we think there are other ways to produce alpha emitters, but people do have some experience, for example, irradiating radium-226 with like deuteron breakup neutron sources. And so they do have some experience with how to handle radium, especially like in the presence of neutrons. But if you're trying to do other transmutations, for example, like copper-67, then handling the feedstock, which might be zinc or something else, is definitely quite challenging. And so we've been working with folks actually at the Frederick Center at the University of Saskatchewan on new radiation pathways. And we're basically trying to develop the radiochemistry for extracting radioisotopes produced in feedstock irradiated by fusion neutrons.
That's great, Jason. Thank you so much. So fascinating to hear about all the work you folks are leading. Before we move on to the next question, just want to remind all those attendees who are here with us today. First of all, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. But also later in the discussion today, we will have some time for questions and answers. There's a little Q&A button on the top of your screen. At least there should be a Q&A button at the top of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions through there throughout the event, and we will get to them towards the end of the discussion. I've already seen some great questions that are coming in, so that's excellent to see. Cal, I'm going to come to you first on this next question. Obviously, Canada has a bit of a historic leadership in this space, but what aspects of Canada's isotope ecosystem, or maybe it's actually the supply chain, I'm not sure, you'll be the one to let us know, but what has drawn you, or your organization, I suppose, to consider developing its technology here in Canada? Oh, you're on mute, Cal. Cal, you're on mute.
Of course. So we're building a commercial demonstration unit for a 100 megawatt sodium fast reactor that has the ability to, and positions in the core to have a fast neutron irradiation of isotopes. So there is a radioisotope production heritage in Canada with well-established processing distribution companies like Nordion and BWX Medical. So ARC's irradiation service model can connect to an existing supply chain rather than build one up from scratch. There's also precedents for reactor isotope production in our country with NRU, and then Bruce Power making lutetium-177 in a CANDU. On top of that, ARC has partnered with NB Power, an experienced nuclear operator, has a licensed site at Pointe-le-Pro, and strong government support for SMRs and securing the isotope supply chain. So that's why we're adding an isotope option to the ARC 100, or exploring adding an isotope option.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cal. Michael, I'll come to you with the same question. Your role is obviously focused on finding a Canadian site for this. So please do tell us, what has led Transmutex to Canada?
Simply put, it was really the breadth and the historical experience available in Canada, and the multiple options that we have for finding partners, finding solutions to some of the problems we're working through, such as waste. So waste will be an issue that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And we found in Canada that people are fairly open to discuss various solutions that exist. There's already a strategy in place in Canada, at least to some extent, or more than in Switzerland or Germany. So that's been one of the attractions. There's also been the political openness to having a new nuclear facility. We also engage a little bit with Germany, so there you can expect conversations are a little bit different when you start mentioning the N word. So these are the things that we also have to navigate, and we found it was relatively easy to start this process in Canada. And then also there's the expertise. So we believe we bring some expertise for the cyclotron design, maybe a little bit the targetry system, but there's obviously everything else: extraction, the purification of these isotopes, the GMP process, and how do you achieve GMP. There's also the transport logistics, and these are not necessarily things we want to be an expert at, but we want to work with experts who have been doing this for a very long time. So in a sense, we do want to be a little bit plug and play in the existing ecosystem of both reactors, but also accelerators, and to try and differentiate ourselves just sufficiently to be able to work with all these people as well.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Tom and Jason, I'll let you chime in if you're interested as well. I mean, both coming from jurisdictions in the UK and the US that have some expertise as well, to say the least. So, Tom, what led Astral to collaborate with Canadian companies?
Yeah, well, I think right at the get-go of founding the company, I was collaborating with the Canadians, and my co-founder is based in Toronto, is the CEO, Thelma Firestone, and he always refers to himself as the original remote worker because he was using, Skype back in the 90s before COVID made it cool. So we've always been aware since the founding of the company that Canada is a great place for nuclear medicine. And I think in particular, in addition to that, with the hardware that we're manufacturing in the UK, about 10 to 20% of the supply chain is Canadian. And I'm happy to say that in terms of the scaling bottlenecks, what we're doing, the Canadian supply chain is not one of them. So we're very happy with our Canadian partners, particularly with OPG supplying tritium, which is quite a critical resource for us. So on top of that, obviously, when it comes to scaling into a very sort of heavily regulated infrastructure, a capex heavy industry like nuclear medicine, building all of your skills from scratch and building all of your buildings from scratch isn't really an option. So you really have to build relationships and partnerships with the best of the best. And that's where Canada comes in, sort of head and shoulders above many other places globally. So, and I agree with the other two that it's also the collaborative attitude, and I think CNIC really sort of represents that. And there's a medical radioisotope task force that we've set up in the UK where we're basically looking to emulate what CNIC's doing in Canada. So we think the model's really good. It's because a lot of other countries and jurisdictions, sort of over the past over 10 years since the sort of renaissance in targeted radiotherapy, a lot of other countries have sort of missed the boat because they haven't been as aware and as strategic as Canada and other places. So that's really what draws us there, as well as the nature. I love to go canoeing every so often, do some portage. So that doesn't hurt.
Definitely doesn't hurt to be in Canada for that, for sure. Jason, you mentioned earlier collaboration with the Fedoric Center. So what has led Marathon Fusion to seek out those Canadian partners?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I'd say that Canadians are just incredibly friendly. So very easy to work with. But yeah, like big picture, I'd say it's workforce. So about half of our employees, our full-time employees, are actually from Canada. They're Canadians. Marathon Fusion has this capstone project with the University of British Columbia, where we have a work internship program over 1 to 2 years for master's students on the physics and engineering program, and we have found this to be an extraordinarily good source of talent. And every student in this program has been both incredibly skilled and also just very easy to work with. And so yeah, we've just had a very good experience in terms of workforce. And I think everyone talks about how challenging scaling the workforce for radioisotope production is going to be really, really hard, aside from all the other hardware and regulatory issue side of things. As for the Federic Center, just availability to work with us very, very quickly, willingness to work with us quickly, and just depth of expertise. So I can't really say too much of the details now, but we're looking at making new isotopes, and this involved having to go through some quite complex arguments and trying to understand how the nuclear physics worked. And the folks at the Federic Center were just on top of things right away. And so that was really the main reason that we opted to work with them.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Jason. Like I mentioned, Canada has a bit of a historic leadership role in this industry. But we continue to have ambitions. There was great news earlier this week. This may be news for some of the folks on the call, so I'm happy to be the one who gets to deliver the good news, that the Government of Canada has formally committed now to the development of a comprehensive radioisotope strategy and is aiming to increase its role in the global market by at least 10% in the coming years, which is very exciting. Yes, I love the claps, Tom. That's exactly how we felt when we saw the news. Also exciting news out of Ontario, a commitment to double isotope production by 2030. So lots of growth planned for the industry in Canada. As this growth is planned, I'd love to hear all your perspectives on this if you're open to it. Do you have any advice, either for industry or for government, in how Canada can continue to expand its role in this exciting industry? I see Cal is unmuted, so maybe Cal, I can pass it to you first if that works.
Sure. I think two things would help here. First, a clear and reasonable licensing path for adding isotope production to a power reactor. As a graded approach rather than something that may reopen the base reactor license and That predictability would help investments move faster. Second, the supply chain needs to be supported from end to end. Actinium-225 production ultimately depends on radium-226 supply, like Tom was saying. And the final product depends on processing capacity. So the irradiation source, the target supply, and the processing capacity should be treated as an integrated system. A bottleneck in any one of these would limit the whole chain.
Great reflections there, Callan. I think we have some government folks on the call, so they can make note of that, I'm sure. Michael, I'll come to you next. And you're, I guess, in the actual process of considering a site and working with the CNSC. So any reflections on what we could do better?
So obviously the Natural Resource Canada policy that was published, that was really, really good news. From our perspective, obviously startups, and not only, but we're also always looking for funding. So it's always good to be able to present a nice message to potential or existing investors as well. So we want to move to Canada. There's no question there. But we also need to convince our investors that this is the right decision for them and for us. So having that clear policy in place definitely helps. Cal already mentioned the CNSC licensing. So obviously time is literally money for startups. So sometimes the time scale at which the CNSC could potentially work and at which we're burning our funds are not always compatible. Now, we've already engaged with the CNSC and they're very, very accepting of that issue. And we're working together to also reduce that time. And also there's one thing, so I mentioned we want to reproduce what Triumph has been doing for a number of years, and Triumph have been incredible partners. Not only we've been engaging with McMaster and others as well. In Switzerland, it's the same. It's a federal country, so there's also federal funding for some of these federally funded institutes, Triumph being the main partner in Canada. So we've learned a lot from the team over there. They've been open also to sharing. And we hope that continues as well. And for that, we cannot necessarily fund directly Triumph, but we definitely see the benefit of having these institutes helping us and transferring that knowledge.
That's great. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah,
Jason, yeah, Tom, please go ahead.
Yeah, happy to chime in whilst it's fresh in my mind. I totally agree with Cal and Michael with their statements. So I'll echo them. And if I can even add to them, would be sort of Canada's. You obviously have to go for the entire supply chain very, very holistically. As Cal said, you can't look at things in isolation of just the production mechanism, for example. But also something from my perspective, I think there's a lot to gain by sort of elevating the topic between nations as well. So the sort of between the UK and Canada, I think I visited Canada House in London and I spoke to the sort of trade envoy there, and sort of energy's got a very, very high priority there. But I think the strategic nature of isotopes, particularly in the sort of world that we're all living in at the moment, where sovereignty of supply is very important. I think it definitely deserves some attention, and I think there's some quite strategic things that Canada could do at that level, where the sort of the depth and breadth of experience, I think a lot of other countries would find extremely valuable to work with on at that level. So that's the only thing I can really think of to add, because Michael and Cal really covered a lot of good ground there.
That's great. Jason, anything you'd like to add on advice for industry or for government on how we can continue to grow the sector?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would add is that it's just extraordinarily it's very interesting to note how long the development timescales are in our industry. If you look at the various companies that are trying to scale up, lead supply or actinium supply, and you look at the timelines for how long the facilities take to build, and even when they start to get online, how long it actually takes to build up to full capacity. Why is this important? It's because if you just look at the number of therapies that are currently in clinical trials, I mean, it's extremely large, right? We only really have two radioligand therapies that are FDA approved, both lutetium, and there's going to be a huge supply increase, or like demand increase, sorry. And basically, I think that now is the time that companies are thinking about where they're going to be siting, and so it's really important just to encourage companies to site in Canada, because that is going to be locked in long term. So the decisions for supply in like 10 or 15 years are being made now, right? That's the thing I would add.
That's
Yeah, I
great.
agree, Jason. If I can add to that,
Please.
particularly around the infrastructure point, because particularly as a private company trying to get investment, asking venture capitalists or other types of investors to pay for bricks and mortar is always tough as an ROI, even if it is for nuclear medicine. So, and in particular, I think there's different groups in Europe. It's called Swiss Rockets, who are trying to put together basically like a nuclear medicine incubator. So you have hot cells, you have all the licensing infrastructure, you have some of the expertise, and that would allow companies to move a lot faster. And you can see where the sort of centers of innovation have happened in nuclear medicine. They kind of look like a bit of a semi sort of government or publicly funded incubator, if you squint your eyes. So there's probably a bit more work that could be done in that space to ease the passage for companies to grow faster into the space.
That's so fascinating to hear. Thanks for chiming in with that, Tom. That's news to me, so we'll have a look into that for sure. Just to wrap up the kind of formal panel discussion part before we come to the Q&A session, and lots of good Q&As coming in, some very technical questions that I'm going to have to attempt to read out to this great panel we have here today. But please keep the Q&A questions coming in. This has been a very forward-looking discussion, I think, so far, but we always like to kind of end on an even more so forward-looking question. So if you would look 10, 15, 20 years down the line, what role could you see your technology playing within Canada's isotope production ecosystem, and how might it complement some of the existing technologies that are already producing isotopes here in Canada? Cal, you're unmuted again, so I'm going to come to you first.
I feel singled out here. Okay, so we feel that the ARC 100 could carve out a niche in effectively producing selected isotopes at scale that thermal reactors can't. Having an ARC 100 co-located with a CANDU 6 at Point Lepreau would allow for a diverse supply of isotopes in Atlantic Canada. This may provide further opportunity to establish a regional hub for isotope production and processing in Atlantic Canada. Over the horizon, if we're looking further, I would see fast reactors becoming one pillar of a more diverse isotope supply, filling a gap rather than displacing anybody else. NB Power is planning multiple ARC 100 units, so part of the fleet could produce isotopes alongside electricity, giving Canada a domestic source of actinium-225 with the option of a much wider range of isotopes. The technology in this space are complementary rather than competing. Accelerators are flexible and can sit close to demand. Fusion technology is emerging with new production pathways. CANDUs are already producing at scale, and fast reactors add a different production route using fast neutron spectrum. So that's what I see coming.
Thanks, Cal. Michael, I know you folks at Transmutex have a pretty ambitious timeline, so tell us a little bit more about how you see 10, 20 years down the road. What role might your technology be playing in the Canadian ecosystem?
So we really aim to be just complementary to what's currently existing either in the smaller energy spectrum range for the accelerators, so up to 30 MeV, and what's currently being done in the reactors. We obviously trying to reach at much higher energies, 200 MeV and above. That also unlocks certain other isotopes, so terbium being one of them, or one of the isotopes of terbium. And 200 MeV would not necessarily be sufficient to go to unlocking some of these other isotopes, but at least we're a gateway technology to actually achieving these methods of production. We're also introducing very high intensity, so nearly 5 milliamps of current in the beam. So there we also hope to scale up and therefore reduce some of the prices of these isotopes. And one thing to keep in mind, and that goes back to my introduction, is I joined Transmutex as a nuclear engineer, and the aim was to actually use a proton cyclotron to fire protons into a lead-cooled reactor, and to start the breeding process of thorium, but also for transmuting and effectively burning and reducing some of the waste. So the accelerator we're building now is actually one of the key components to being able to achieve this in the very, very long term.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. I think the pricing point you mentioned there is something that's at the top of mind for a lot of folks as well. So maybe I think I saw some of the Q&A questions touched on that. So we'll see if we can get to them. Jason, I'll pass it to you next. How might Marathon Fusion fit into the Canadian ecosystem a few decades down the line?
Yeah, it's always hard to project even 10 to 15 years out, right?
Of course.
But I would say there are two aspects. So one is stable isotope production. We do hope to set up a lithium-6 and lithium-7 enrichment facility in Canada, in the coming years. And so we hope that we'd be able to support the radioisotope and fusion industry in that way. And then the second side, transmutation. We hope that in 10 to 15 years, there'll be a lot of 14 MeV neutrons available in Canada, generated in fusion reactors or generators. And we would hope to be able to partner with those companies and help them realize early revenue producing radioisotopes.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And last but not least, Tom, I'll give you the last word before we head to the Q&A. Astral has a lot of partnerships, a lot of progress in the past, even this week. So where might Astral fit in 10, 15, 20 years?
I do hate trying to look into the future that far. It's difficult, but I'll give it a go. I think the thing that we try and say most to people, especially if they've got some familiarity with the industry, is I expect sort of these types of fusion systems to be able to disrupt the nuclear medicine industry in the same way that cyclotrons did. So you can imagine it sort of doing for neutron-produced isotopes what cyclotrons did for proton-produced isotopes. So sort of after the 90s, you had cyclotrons were commercially available as an option, and then clinicians started to use these short-lived isotopes like gallium-68, fluorine-18, because it was better for their clinical needs, and then they had the chemistry that was developed over time. So that availability of more high-energy particles that are sort of available commercially sort of will open and expand the menu of what's possible to produce. So I think really long-term, one of the questions I like to ask, which is kind of chiming around the price point, is how accessible could you make nuclear medicine? Right. So at the moment, it's kind of isolated to countries like Canada or others who have a really mature nuclear industry and have made the right strategic decisions. But there's a lot of the world that doesn't have access, but they still have cancer. Right. So I would really hope in 10 to 15 years, the emerging markets have got more established, and the barrier to entry has been lowered. Right. In terms of how much it costs or how long it takes to get access to critical cancer care for a lot of these countries. So that's sort of how I think. And I think the isotopes that we say are the isotopes of today at the moment, 10 to 15 years could look very different, and hopefully they'd be more widely accessible and cheaper. So
that's a really great point to end on, I think, Tom. It's something the CNIC is totally aligned with, and we're trying to make some progress on that front in collaboration with our friends at the International Atomic Energy Agency through their Rays of Hope initiative, which, like you said, cancer impacts everybody, and there's so many regions in the world that don't have access to the care that we have here in Canada. So yes, it's totally aligned that hopefully there'll be some progress on that in the coming years. Lots of questions coming in using the Q&A function, which is great. Please keep them rolling in. I'm going to start with maybe a tough question. I don't think any of them are particularly easy questions. I don't want to pin them directly onto anybody, so I'm going to pose them to the group, and feel free to jump in if inclined. And if nobody jumps in, then I may have to pin them onto somebody. Okay, so the first question here is from Malcolm. It's unlikely that all the radioisotopes discussed today, I presume, will become clinical standards for treatments. So how are your organizations ensuring that your systems are flexible to progress when your preferred solution does not make it through clinical trials? Anyone have thoughts on that?
I can chime in a little bit.
Sure.
So we have been discussing that internally quite extensively. So we do have the advantage that we've seen what Triumph are capable of doing with their facility and the modularity they have in producing a range of isotopes. We also have that flexibility. We have multiple target stations. We can also change the materials that will be exposed to the beam. We can also reduce the energy of the beams to bring it down to something that would be that will allow us to produce other isotopes at scales. And that's always at the back of our minds. We are effectively a spallation source as well. So we're also looking at being a facility for both proton and neutron irradiation as well. We end up with parasitic neutrons and protons anyway as a result of the interaction. And that's more or less how we're trying to diversify a little bit, just in case actinium-225 isn't as it's promised.
That's great background. Thank you, Michael. Anybody else want to chime in on how you're preparing for a little bit of flexibility?
Yeah, I'd say we're definitely positioning ourselves as much as possible to be isotope agnostic. So that sort of isotope production roadmap I shared with you is definitely sort of showing. I mean, it's very difficult to get hold of copper-67 in Europe, for example. So we're looking to sort of pair up what our system is able to produce in meaningful quantities versus, okay, what's needed today in terms of even just a clinical trial demand, to be honest, because we're quite a lean company, so clinical trial demand is perfectly fine for us. But beyond that, I think when it comes to actually getting through the trials and when you see that real inflection point, as you did see for lutetium, you have to keep an open mind and you have to sort of factor in, okay, what are the resources required? How long would it take to totally switch out different capabilities and building into your facilities being future proof? So you're not just building all your filtration systems and your hot cells and everything else just to be a one-trick pony. So that's something that we think about quite a lot, and we're thinking hard about being able to pivot as needed in this sort of ever-changing market. But I would sort of flip that on its head slightly and say, if you look at the longer history of nuclear medicine, there's a lot of isotopes that are used now that took a lot of development of radiochemistry. It took a long time to get the radiochemistry really, really good. And if you could have chosen from the start an isotope with much easier radiochemistry, you would have not chosen that isotope. And that really comes down to that isotope was just really available. So people had hold of it, so they're able to develop the chemistry and they're able to develop things. So I would say that it's a bit more nuanced rather than just saying, oh, an isotope didn't get through the clinical trials, therefore all the other isotopes and different chelators and different chemistries also failed. And so I would sort of say, particularly isotopes that have more availability are more likely to succeed because there'll be more attempts basically to put them through the clinical trial phases as well.
Great, thanks, Tom. Jason or Cal, do you want to chime in on that question at all?
ARC's looking at it a little bit differently because we're not focusing on a specific isotope. We're just using the actinium as a something to run through the process. Basically, it's an irradiation service where we have multiple positions in the core with a large flux and fast neutrons. So target design would be everything. So you design the target, we can put it in and take it out for you. So depending on what isotope you want for the clinical trials will irradiate your target material. It's a slightly different focus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Since our primary goal is power reactor or industrial heat reactor.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Cal. Jason, we actually had a question directed to you. So not to put you right on the spot, but this is a bit of a specific question. On what scale is Marathon enriching lithium?
Yeah, I can't really say the specific numbers now, but I can tell you that our facility will be able to enrich up to roughly 90% enriched lithium-6, which is pretty much as high as the fusion industry wants. And our plasma centrifuge we hope in any given facility will need to actually be producing hundreds of tons per year within maybe 5 years, maybe even kilotons, depending on how quickly the fusion industry takes off and their lithium-6 supply requirements. I also just wanted to say something very quickly about the previous question, which was thinking about new isotope production, right? And how do you pivot? I think that there's something interesting about neutron targets, which is neutrons typically do a lot less heating in any given feedstock, especially say like DT neutrons. And so I am somewhat optimistic that target design iteration might be faster. If you look at the typical design timelines for like a standard hospital class cyclotron, PET trace kind of thing, often we've been told that that's like, a 1 to 2 or even 3 year design process just for designing, a new target for a new isotope. But my hope is that, with fusion neutrons, you just have one energy that you can offtake that neutron at, which is 14 MeV that it's born at, right? And so my hope is that neutron systems, especially fusion neutron targets, might be faster in terms of iterating target designing, adapting to new demand.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. I see a question here that's been upvoted a few times by some of the other attendees, so I think that's a good one to pick. From Kate out of Western in London, Ontario. A recurring theme today has been the need for end-to-end isotope ecosystem, for an end-to-end isotope ecosystem, excuse me. How important is co-location of isotope production, preclinical research, and clinical translation when deciding where to invest and build partnerships? Again, throwing that to the group for anyone who would like to chime in.
I can speak a little bit to that.
That's great.
So when we're, Marathon, we're trying to scale up isotope production. We've been talking with partners, about supplying radioisotopes, and it really does depend a lot on, say, like, obviously like the half-life of the drug that you're producing. But often also just like the labeling process, what kind of specific activity is required. Sometimes it seems like some radiopharma companies really want to centralize their drug production, in a single location, and co-location of our irradiation facility would be extremely helpful. In other cases, it does make a lot more sense to be decentralized. Like I don't think, like, for example, people Arano, who's making, thorium-228 lead generators that has a half-life of 1.9 years, I don't think they really need to be co-located. Maybe even arguably the same for actinium-225 that has about a 10-day half-life. So I think there are some very basic arguments that long-lived radioisotopes don't need to be co-located. Shorter-lived ones typically do. And Tom brought up like fluorine-18 earlier. Like that thing absolutely has to be almost certainly co-located.
So which isotopes you could produce depends on what's co-located with you.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in?
I would add to that around the clinical trial point. I think it's a good one, particularly talking to people who conduct clinical trials. There are kind of clusters around the world and hubs that are known for doing it, with a rapid turnaround, and they have a lot of capacity, and people sort of flood from all over the world to try and do clinical trials in those clusters. So yeah, I think particularly on that, more on the front end, on the clinical end, particularly if you're looking to invest or partner that, those sorts of hubs are really, really key. But for the production end, I totally agree with everyone else. It's very isotope dependent, which is kind of interesting when we've all been talking about isotope agnostic platforms. So yeah, I would say proximity is definitely helps. You want to factor that in early, so you're not thinking about it further down the line when you go, oh damn, everyone's after really short-lived isotopes now, and I'm miles away from anyone.
One of the issues with co-locating is there's a limited number of Class 1 nuclear sites in Canada. So choosing where you're going to locate is Class 1 nuclear site dependent.
Sure. That's good.
Because the licensing timeline to license a Class 1 nuclear site is extended.
Yeah. And at the moment, we're moving into a decommissioned nuclear site. I'm a big fan of decommissioned nuclear sites, where you have a landlord that had a nuclear power plant that's been decommissioned. So they know the big scary fissile products and nuclear waste, but they're very pragmatic, and you have a lot of electricity infrastructure already laid out, and you have people who are nuclear literate in the local area, which really helps. So yeah, there are definitely ways of where you could scale without necessarily requiring totally fresh sites and having to go through the entire licensing process.
Sure.
And existing sites also have most of their environmental, geotechnical, and all that studies already done, which is a significant cost.
Yeah.
That's great. Maybe a rapid fire closing question, if that works. Like 30 seconds, maybe to each speaker, if that works. This question is from Dean at Triumph. We've been talking about Triumph a lot today. So hi, Dean. Thanks for tuning in. In reference to that national isotope strategy that I mentioned earlier, Maybe 30 seconds of reflection. If you were the one who was writing the national isotope strategy for Canada, what would be one thing you would want to ensure that was in there?
I would most likely try to unlock some funding, publicly available funding, obviously with guarantees and all. Doesn't have to be dilutive or not, but at least make some available funding. And then this also attracts, on the startup side, then we can also go to investors and say, look, there's already funding available. There's definitely confidence in the market. We're moving to Canada. We need also private funding, and then it kind of carries over afterwards.
Yeah, I would add to that maybe don't be afraid to be ambitious. I mean, Canada's in a great position to really lead the way in the next generation of how isotopes are produced. Maybe don't be too safe in your bets, and do to set aside some funding to do some ambitious things, because that can really put you leap and bounds ahead of most of the nations in terms of capability, which would be quite strategic.
Yeah. Jason or Cal, any last reflections on what should be in that strategy?
I think 5 years ago, Canada came up with an SMR strategy with multiple pathways. I think that was a very good strategy document with multiple pathways, a tier 1, tier 2 approach. That worked very well.
That's great. Alrighty, I did see a chime in the chat there from Randy from CMIE saying that some funding opportunities through CMIE is really critical to the industry. And yes, we will always give CMIE a shout out. Some great funding opportunities for some early stage organizations. So if you're not familiar with CMIE, be sure to check them out. However, at this point, we are very fastly approaching time. So I want to take a moment to thank Tom, Jason, Michael, and Cal for joining us this morning. I think this has been such a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot, so I hope all those who joined us have also learned a lot. Thank you also to those from coast to coast, and I saw some folks internationally as well who have joined us for this morning's discussion. Thanks so much for being here. Always great to see such a great audience and such an engaged audience joining us. So with that, we have some exciting upcoming CNIC events that I would love to flag for you all. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing. Very exciting. As usual, it's 3 years running now, we're hosting a Canadian trade mission to the European Association of Nuclear Medicine Conference 2026. This year it's hosted in Vienna, Austria from October 17th to 21st. It's a great opportunity to engage with some of our counterparts over in Europe, and through our partnership with the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries, there's some very exciting funding available for the companies who are selected to participate in the trade mission. Speaking of exciting, there's also some great meetings and opportunities that we've organized for those who are selected to join us on the trade mission, some exclusive opportunities to engage internationally at the ENM conference. So that QR code will bring you directly to register to participate in the trade mission. There's some questions, so be prepared to answer some questions about why you should participate. Great to see some folks who are on the call have already registered, which is awesome. Deadline for that is tomorrow, so make sure you get that application in as soon as possible to ensure that you can join us in Vienna for this exciting opportunity. Also upcoming, we're partnering with our friends over at Ontario Tech University and the Brilliant Energy Institute. They're hosting a very exciting discussion that we're glad to collaborate on, highlighting how Durham region is supporting international isotope innovation. There'll be some panelists from across Durham, and we're glad to kind of join the discussion and have a little announcement as part of the webinar about how BEI and the CNIC will be partnering more thoroughly moving forward. And last but not least, we're glad to announce our next webinar, which is in collaboration with our friends at the University of Toronto Scarborough's Arts and Science Co-op office. Talent and workforce was something that we've discussed a lot today, and we'll be discussing it even more in our next webinar, building the next generation of isotope leaders through co-op talent pipelines, showcasing how co-op students through U of T Scarborough can support your businesses from coast to coast. Obviously, the demand is rapidly increasing for isotopes, and we need people to fill the jobs. So this will be a really good opportunity to learn how co-op students can contribute to your important work. With that, once again, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists for joining us this morning, and to all of those who attended. And until next time, we will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.